I never thought the night would unfold the way it did. In fact, when I first walked into the dining room, I convinced myself it would be like every other family gathering, strained smiles, subtle digs, and me pretending it didn't sting. The table was dressed up beautifully, roasted chicken steaming in the center, bowls of rice, freshly baked bread, and the tang of spices filling the air. On the surface, it looked like any other family dinner. But I knew better. I had been through this before. These gatherings were never about warmth or love. They were about appearances. My family loved looking like the perfect unit, parents proud of their children, siblings laughing together, but behind closed doors, it was different. Behind closed doors, I was nothing more than the safety net. The one they called when bills piled too high, when debt collectors knocked on the door, when someone needed tuition, a new car, or even just spending money. And I gave. I always gave. Not because I had to, but because I thought it would earn me love. Respect. A place at the table where I mattered. But that night, I realized I had been wrong all along. The room buzzed with chatter. My brother, Eric, sat at the head of the table, looking far too comfortable in a role he didn't earn. My parents hovered around him with pride in their eyes, and my sister leaned in, laughing at his every joke. I watched quietly, taking it in, telling myself not to expect anything. But deep down, I hoped, maybe this time would be different. Maybe someone would see me. Dinner moved along in its usual rhythm. Plates passed, glasses clinked, conversations layered on top of each other. I said little, as always. I had learned that speaking up only drew stares, dismissals, or worse, a mockery. So I stayed silent. Then came the toast. Eric stood up, holding his glass high, his smile broad. I just want to take a moment, he began, to thank everyone here. Without the support of this family, I wouldn't be where I am today. Every success I've had, my job, my new car, the apartment, it's all because I had people who believed in me. My parents clapped proudly. My sister let out a cheer. I sat frozen. He went on, milking every second. I've worked hard, of course. But having a family that always had my back, it's priceless. I'm grateful every single day. The applause grew louder. The smiles around me grew wider. And in that entire speech, not once did my name come up. Not once did he acknowledge who had been writing the checks, covering the bills, bailing him out when his reckless choices nearly destroyed him. Not once. My stomach twisted. My hand tightened around my glass. The years flashed through my mind, the loans I had taken out, the hours of overtime I had worked, the vacations I never took because I was too busy paying for his mistakes. And now, here he was, soaking in praise for being the golden child, while I sat invisible in the corner. I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't sudden, it was years in the making. Years of swallowing anger, of convincing myself next time will be different, of letting myself be erased. That night, it all came crashing down. I placed my glass on the table, the sound sharp enough to cut through the laughter. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. My brother froze mid-sip, his smug grin faltering. Funny thing about support, I said, my voice low but steady. It usually comes from the person paying the bills. And last I checked, Eric, that wasn't you. Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's fork clattered onto her plate. My father's brows furrowed. My sister blinked in shock. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. My pulse was pounding in my ears, but my voice stayed strong. For years, I've been the one holding this family together. Every late bill, every emergency, every so-called success, it was me writing the checks, me sacrificing my life so all of you could pretend everything was fine. And in all that time, did anyone once say thank you? Did anyone once acknowledge me? No. You all treated me like I was nothing. And tonight, you proved it again. The silence was deafening. No one dared to move. I turned my gaze to Eric. His smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. "You can play the hero in front of them all you want," I said coldly, "but we both know who's been saving you." My father cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "That's enough. This isn't the time." I snapped my head toward him. "When is the time? When I'm broke? When I've given up everything I have left?" "No, Dad. The time is now. Because I am done. I am done being used. I am done being erased." I let the words hang in the air, each one striking like a hammer. For the first time in my life, I felt them listening, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Backhand index pointing right, and if you've ever been in my shoes, betrayed by the very people who should have lifted you up, erased by your own family while they celebrated someone else, then hear me now. What happened after this night changed everything. Hit that subscribe button, because what came next was a storm none of them were prepared for. I didn't wait for their response. I didn't wait for excuses or apologies. I walked around the table, past their stunned faces, and toward the door. My heart was pounding, my chest tight, but for the first time in years, I felt light. As I reached the hallway, I heard my mother's voice crack behind me. "Wait, please, you don't understand." But I didn't turn back. Not this time. That night was the breaking point. The night I stopped being the invisible provider. The night I realized silence only chained me tighter. And it was only the beginning. When people hear about my breaking point, they often ask, how did it get that bad? How could a family treat one of their own like nothing more than a bank account? The truth is, it didn't start overnight. These shadows stretched back decades, into the corners of my childhood, shaping me long before I understood what was happening. I remember being 6 years old, sitting on the cold kitchen tiles, clutching a crayon drawing I had made. It was simple, just a stick figure family, colored unevenly, with my name written clumsily at the bottom. I had drawn it during recess at school, excited to show my parents. I wanted them to hang it on the fridge the way I saw other kids' parents do. But when I held it up, my mother barely glanced at it. "That's nice, dear," she said, her eyes already drifting toward Eric, who had come in with a plastic trophy from his pee-wee soccer game. The drawing slipped from my hand to the floor as she swept him up into a hug, showering him with praise. My father beamed, snapping photos, his voice thick with pride. No one picked up my drawing. No one asked me about it. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. Even then, I felt the sting of invisibility. That was the first time I realized my place in the family. Eric was the star, the golden child. He was loud, reckless, but always celebrated. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, expected to understand, to sacrifice, to fade into the background. It only grew worse as we got older. Birthdays became showcases for him. He got elaborate parties, expensive gifts, and heartfelt speeches. I got practical presents, clothes for school, books for class, things I needed. On my 16th birthday, when he was given the keys to a brand new car, I was handed a second-hand backpack and a pat on the shoulder. "Be grateful," my parents said. "You're the smart one. You don't need all that to succeed." But it wasn't about the gifts. It was about the message. He was worth celebrating. I was worth enduring. In school, the differences sharpened. Eric struggled, failing classes, skipping homework, getting into fights. But instead of consequences, he got excuses. "He's just spirited," my mother would say with a nervous laugh. "He needs time to find his way." Me? I brought home straight A's, academic awards, certificates lined with gold foil. They nodded, maybe muttered a good job, then quickly moved on. No framed certificates, no proud shouts from the bleachers. Just expectation. "Of course you did well," my father said once. "You always do. That's just who you are." I became addicted to achievement, chasing it like a drug. Maybe if I was perfect enough, I'd finally get noticed. Maybe if I sacrificed more, gave more, tried harder, they'd finally see me. But no matter how high I climbed, the spotlight never shifted. When I was 14, Eric wrecked his bike by riding it drunk down the street. He came home with scraped knees, and my parents fussed over him for hours. They bought him a new bike the very next week. That same year, I won first place in a regional science competition. I came home, medal in hand, excitement bubbling in my chest. My mother looked at it briefly and said, "That's nice, but don't brag in front of your brother. You know how sensitive he gets." That sentence burned itself into me. Don't shine too bright. Don't outshine him. Hide your success to protect his ego. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of my role as the family's silent support system. By the time we were adults, the roles were carved in stone. Eric was the dreamer, the risk-taker, the one who could do no wrong. I was the fixer, the provider, the one expected to clean up the messes. When Eric dropped out of college after a year of partying, who stepped in to cover the tuition debt so my parents wouldn't lose their savings? Me. When he crashed his car, drunk again, who signed the check to replace it? Me. When he gambled away his rent money and faced eviction, who bailed him out quietly, discreetly, so no one would judge him? Me. And every time, my parents would say, "You're so good to your brother. He's lucky to have you." Lucky? No. He wasn't lucky. He was entitled. He had been trained to believe the world would always bend for him, while I had been trained to believe my worth was in how much I could give. The resentment grew in silence. At first, I told myself it was love, that this was what family did. But over the years, love twisted into duty, and duty hardened into bitterness. I couldn't remember the last time someone asked me how I was doing, what I wanted, what I needed. I was a tool. A wallet. A silent shadow making sure the golden child never fell. And the cruelest part? I accepted it. For years, I played my part. Smiling at the table, clapping for his achievements, pretending I didn't notice when my sacrifices were erased. But deep down, I noticed. I noticed everything. Those childhood shadows never left me. They lingered in every corner of my life, whispering reminders of where I stood. They told me I didn't matter, that I was replaceable, that my only value was in what I could give away. Until the night of the toast. That was the night those shadows finally cracked open. Because as much as my childhood shaped me into silence, that dinner, the smug smile on Eric's face, the applause from my parents, ignited something stronger than the shadows. It ignited rage. And for the first time, I let it out. I walked out of that house no longer the invisible sibling. But the echoes of childhood followed me. They didn't disappear just because I finally spoke up. They clung to me, whispering doubts, pulling me back. The truth is, escaping those shadows would be a battle of its own. And as I left that dinner behind, I didn't yet realize how deep the scars really ran, or how hard my family would fight to keep me in the role they had built for me. Because for them, my silence wasn't just convenience. It was survival. And I had just shattered it. People often assume that betrayal is a single moment, one big event that tears you apart. But the truth? Betrayal is slow. It's built piece by piece, favor by favor, sacrifice by sacrifice, until one day you wake up and realize you've been bleeding for years without even noticing the cuts. That was my life. From the outside, I looked strong. Independent. Successful, even. My coworkers saw me as reliable, the one who never said no, the one who always showed up. My friends thought I was generous, always paying the bill, always covering someone when they came up short. But behind the mask, I was exhausted. Because every extra dollar I made, every hour of overtime I worked, went not toward building my own future, but toward keeping my family's broken promises alive. It started small. Gas money for Eric when he forgot his wallet. A phone bill my parents couldn't cover that month. Groceries when my sister's paycheck ran out. Each request sounded reasonable. Each excuse came wrapped in guilt. We'll pay you back soon. It's just this once. You know how much we appreciate you. But once turned into always. And appreciation turned into expectation. I still remember the first time I cleared out my savings account. I was 23, fresh out of college, just starting my first real job. I had plans, an apartment of my own, maybe even saving for a trip abroad. But then Eric called. He was drowning in credit card debt, collectors threatening to drag our parents into the mess because they had co-signed one of his accounts. I didn't even think. I walked into the bank, emptied my account, and wired the money. He thanked me once. A quick text message. Then he disappeared, back to living recklessly. Meanwhile, I was left staring at an empty balance, eating noodles for months just to scrape by. That was the pattern. Eric would fall. My parents would panic. I would pay. Rinse. Repeat. But it wasn't just money. It was time. It was opportunity. When I was offered a promotion at work that required moving out of state, my mother cried. We can't do this without you. Who will help if something happens? Who will keep the house afloat? You can't just leave us. So I turned it down. I stayed. And Eric took the spotlight as the child who was always around. When a relationship I cared about started getting serious, my father sat me down. Do you think it's wise to start a family of your own right now? You know your brother still needs guidance. You know your parents need support. Don't be selfish. So I pulled back. I ended things before they got too deep. I told myself I was being responsible. In truth, I was just being controlled. Years slipped away like sand through my fingers. Vacations I never took. Dreams I shelved. Friendships I neglected because I was always rushing home to fix someone else's crisis. Every part of me was invested in keeping everyone else afloat, while no one noticed I was drowning. The cruelest part? They acted like it was natural. Like it was my duty. When Eric needed rent again, my parents didn't even ask if I could help. They just said, "You'll handle it, won't you?" as if it were a fact. When my sister wanted to go back to school, I co-signed her loans. She dropped out after a year. Guess who the collectors called? Every check I wrote was a piece of me I never got back. Every sacrifice was another reminder that I didn't matter unless I was useful. And yet, I stayed quiet. Why? Because I thought love was sacrifice. I thought being a good son, a good sibling, meant putting everyone else first. I told myself this was family. That one day, they'd see. That one day, they'd thank me. But deep down, I knew better. They didn't want me to be happy. They wanted me to be useful. And the truth I had been avoiding all those years was simple: I wasn't family. I was a resource. By the time that infamous dinner arrived, the toast, the erasure, I was already hollow. I had given so much of myself that there was barely anything left. My bank account wasn't the only thing empty. My spirit was. But what I didn't realize yet was that my sacrifices weren't just ignored. They were being rewritten. In my family's story, I wasn't the provider. I wasn't the one keeping the roof standing. No. In their story, Eric was. And that rewriting, that theft of my very identity, was the ultimate betrayal. The silent sacrifices had built the cage. But what came next would lock it shut. People think betrayal is a dagger you see coming, a sudden strike that takes your breath away. But the worst betrayals aren't sharp. They're slow. They creep in quietly, disguised as laughter, as tradition, as just a joke. And by the time you realize what's happening, the blade has been twisting inside you for years. For me, betrayal came wearing familiar faces. Smiles I grew up trusting. Voices I once thought meant safety. It came the day my father looked me in the eye and said, "You're so responsible, Hannah. We never have to worry about you." I should have been proud. Instead, I felt invisible. Because what he meant wasn't that I was capable. What he meant was that I didn't need care. That my needs didn't exist. That their energy, their attention, their money, their love, belonged to my sister. It came the year I paid off Emily's tuition, quietly wiring the money so she wouldn't drop out yet again. At the family barbecue weeks later, my parents raised their glasses to her determination. "We're so proud of how you're chasing your dreams, Emily," they said. She beamed. I stood there with smoke from the grill stinging my eyes, wondering if anyone would ever see me at all. It came the night I surprised my mom with a new washing machine after hers broke down. She hugged me, thanked me, then, days later, told a neighbor, "Emily found us such a good deal. She's so thoughtful." My gift, my money, my effort, erased with a single sentence. And the ugliest betrayal came wrapped in laughter. Emily had always been the performer, the one who made people laugh, the one who filled the room. I was the quiet one, the one who made things work behind the curtain. But somewhere along the way, she learned that my silence wasn't just convenient, it was exploitable. "Don't work yourself into an early grave, hon," she'd say at dinner. "Careful, money doesn't buy happiness," she'd tease at Christmas. Or the cruelest one, the gift she once gave me, a mug that read, "CEO of Being Lonely." Everyone laughed. Even my parents. I forced a smile as if it didn't matter, as if the mug wasn't the truest reflection of how they all saw me. Every barb was framed as humor. Every insult brushed off as just Emily being Emily. But jokes leave scars too. Especially when they come from the people who are supposed to protect you. What hurt the most wasn't the words themselves. It was that no one defended me. No one ever said, "That's not fair. That's not true. Hannah matters." They let the jokes stand. They let the betrayal harden into tradition. Over time, I began to feel like a ghost at my own family's table. Present, but unseen. Necessary, but unloved. And then came the night that stripped away every last illusion. Thanksgiving. Emily's favorite holiday. She arrived late, of course, making her grand entrance in a velvet dress that glittered under the restaurant lights. Everyone stood to hug her, as if the evening hadn't truly started until she appeared. I stayed seated, watching the performance unfold. The dinner went as usual, shallow laughter, half-hearted stories, the kind of surface-level warmth that photographs well but feels cold in person. I sipped my water, silent as ever, waiting for it all to end. Then Emily stood. Glass raised. Eyes gleaming. "Here's to family," she said, voice sweet as honey. To shared memories, unconditional love, and being there for one another no matter what. For a moment, I almost believed her. For a moment, I almost let myself feel part of it. But then she paused. Her smile curled. And with the same ease she used to breathe, she twisted the knife. Except for Hannah, of course. The failure who thinks money makes her worth something. The words hung in the air like smoke. And then, they laughed. Not gasps. Not outrage. Not silence. Laughter. My father chuckled. My mother pressed her lips together, but said nothing. My cousins looked down, awkward but unwilling to speak. And in that laughter, I saw it all. Every sacrifice, every erased contribution, every stolen credit. Every silent betrayal crystallized in that one moment. They didn't just use me. They didn't just depend on me. They mocked me for it. And that was when something inside me broke. Or maybe, it finally healed. The laughter still echoed in my ears long after it should have died. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at Emily with her glass raised high, her smirk sharp enough to cut glass. My family's chuckles blended into the clatter of silverware and the faint music playing overhead, but all I could hear was that one word she had spat like venom: a failure. Me. The one who paid the bills. The one who carried every burden. The one who bled silently so they could all live comfortably. To them, I wasn't just invisible. I was a joke. My heart pounded in my chest, hot and heavy. I wanted to leave. I wanted to vanish into the night, walk away and never look back. But something rooted me to that chair. Something louder than my shame, sharper than my pain. It was rage. Not the wild, reckless kind that burned out fast. No. This was deeper. This was years of swallowed words, of fake smiles, of sacrifices dismissed and erased. This was the rage of a ghost finally deciding to haunt the living. Emily sat down, triumphant. She clinked glasses with my father, with my mother, basking in the glow of her cruelty disguised as charm. No one stopped her. No one defended me. I could feel my hand shaking as I set my fork down. The clink against the plate silenced the table more effectively than her toast ever could. Heads turned. Eyes found me. And for the first time in years, I let them. I stood slowly, every muscle in my body trembling, not with fear but with release. My glass was still in my hand, and I raised it, mirroring Emily's gesture. To family, I began, my voice calm, almost too calm. The ones who take without asking. The ones who forget who really pays the price. The air shifted. My father frowned. My mother's lips parted, ready to scold me. But I didn't stop. To sacrifices erased. To bills paid in silence. To tuition covered and debts cleared while credit was handed to someone else. To gifts bought and then claimed by another. My eyes locked on Emily. To jokes made at the expense of the only person who never laughed. Emily's smirk faltered. I lowered my glass, my hand steady now. You want to call me a failure? I asked, my voice sharp. Fine. But remember this, without my so-called failure, this family would have collapsed years ago. Without me, there would be no roof over your heads, no education, no second chances. You've all been living on my silence. My weakness. My generosity. The table was silent. Even the background music seemed distant now. I leaned forward slightly, my words deliberate. But tonight, that ends. Tonight, I stop being your safety net. Tonight, I stop paying for the privilege of being disrespected. If I'm a failure, then it's because I failed myself by letting you treat me this way for so long. Emily's face hardened. My father shifted uncomfortably. My mother whispered my name, Hannah, don't, but I did. I finished my glass in one sharp swallow, set it down with finality, and looked at them all. Here's my toast. To me. To finally standing up. To finally walking away. The silence that followed was suffocating. No laughter. No applause. Just stunned faces staring back at me as if they were seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. I turned and began walking toward the door, their voices rising behind me, my mother calling my name, Emily scoffing, my father demanding I sit back down. But I didn't stop. My steps grew stronger with each one, my shoulders lighter, my chest unclenching with every breath. Because in that moment, I knew something undeniable. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. The beginning of truth. The beginning of revenge. The beginning of reclaiming my life from the people who stole it. And as I pushed open the door and stepped into the cold night air, I smiled for the first time in years. Because they thought I was weak. They thought I was theirs to use forever. But they were wrong. And soon, they would see just how wrong. The door closed behind me with a heavy thud, and for a moment, the cold night air stole my breath. I stood on the steps of the restaurant, shivering, though not from the wind. My body shook with the weight of what I'd just done. For years, I had dreamed of saying those words, dreamed of breaking free, but now that I had, reality hit like a tidal wave. My family was behind me, stunned, angry, whispering in disbelief. I could almost hear them scrambling to make sense of it, to spin it, to minimize it. I walked faster. My heels clicked against the pavement as I made my way to the car. With every step, the panic inside me warred against something stronger, relief. For the first time, I wasn't sitting quietly, swallowing my pain. For the first time, I wasn't letting them laugh at me and walk away untouched. For the first time, I had spoken. Inside the restaurant, chaos bloomed. "What the hell was that?" my father's voice snapped, sharp and cutting. "What got into her?" Emily laughed nervously, swirling the wine in her glass. "Oh, come on, Dad. She's just being dramatic. Hannah always takes everything too seriously. You know how she is." But her voice wasn't steady. She hadn't expected me to bite back, not like that. Her smirk from earlier was gone, replaced by the twitch of unease she couldn't quite hide. My mother, pale and shaken, muttered, "She meant every word. Did you hear her? She's done with us." "Done with us?" my father scoffed. "She'll be back. She always comes back. Who else does she have?" And that was the question, wasn't it? For years, they believed I had no one but them. That I needed them more than they needed me. That I would always come crawling back because loneliness was my only option. But that night, as I drove home with the streetlights blurring past my window, I realized the truth: I didn't need them. They needed me. At home, I collapsed onto the couch, my body trembling from the adrenaline. The quiet of my apartment pressed in around me, unfamiliar but comforting. No voices mocking me. No eyes rolling at my silence. Just peace. And yet, the silence was also terrifying. What if I had made a mistake? What if I had burned the only bridges I had left? My chest tightened at the thought, but then I remembered Emily's voice, venom dripping from the word failure. I remembered the laughter. The betrayal. No. I hadn't burned a bridge. I had burned a cage. Back at the restaurant, the family tried to recover. Plates were pushed aside, glasses drained too quickly. Emily finally broke the silence. "She'll cool off. She always does." But deep down, even she wasn't sure. She knew the power shift had begun. If I meant what I said, if I really walked away, the family would crumble. Bills would pile up. Debts would return. Cracks would widen. And for the first time, the thought of life without me scared them. That night, my phone buzzed over and over. Messages from my mother. My father. Even Emily, who tried to play it off as a joke. "Han, you overreacted. Don't ruin Thanksgiving over one comment. You need to come back and apologize. This isn't how family works." "Wow, drama much? You made a scene and embarrassed yourself. Grow up." I didn't reply. I stared at the glowing screen, my heart heavy, and set the phone face down. Because this wasn't about one night. This wasn't about one toast. This was about years of betrayal, of being erased, of being mocked for giving everything. And for once, I wasn't going back. The aftermath of that night rippled through every corner of my family. Bills arrived and weren't paid on time. Emily's tuition debt returned, interest clawing at it. My parents began to argue, the stress cracking their once perfect facade. They called me again. They begged. They demanded. They guilt. But each call went unanswered. Each message left on read. For the first time, they felt what I had carried all along, the weight of responsibility, the burden of survival. And the truth was undeniable now: without me, their world didn't function. And as much as they hated it, as much as they wanted to deny it, they were about to learn the one lesson I had kept buried for years. You can laugh at the person who sacrifices for you. You can erase them. You can mock them. But the moment they walk away, you will finally understand what they were worth. And by then, it will be too late. Silence can be the loudest answer of all. For days after Thanksgiving, I gave them nothing. No calls, no texts, no visits. I let their words sit unanswered, their guilt trips bounce against a wall that no longer crumbled. Every night, my phone lit up with messages. Hannah, you can't just ignore your family like this. You embarrassed us, but we can move past it if you apologize. We need to talk about the bills. Things are piling up. And, from Emily, LOL, you're really dragging this out. Chill, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. Each message only hardened me further. They weren't apologizing. They weren't admitting what they'd done. They weren't even acknowledging the years I had carried them. No, they only cared about what my absence cost them. And that was the moment the shift began. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting. I wasn't just surviving their mockery. I was in control. They needed me more than I ever needed them. That was power. I sat in my small apartment, the quiet pressing in, and realized something dangerous. If I could endure their laughter for years, I could endure their silence now. If I could carry their weight all this time, I could certainly carry my own. But could they? The first crack showed when my mother called, her voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. Hannah, your father and I were behind on the mortgage. Just a little. We'll catch up. But, if you could help this one time. One time. As if I hadn't already done it dozens of times before. I closed my eyes, the familiar pull of guilt trying to drag me back. My mother's voice trembled, and a part of me, the old me, wanted to say yes. To fix it. To save them. But then I remembered the laughter. Emily's glass raised high. The word failure echoing through the restaurant. And I said softly, I can't help you this time. Silence. Shock. Then, a whisper, Hannah, please. I ended the call. For hours, I sat in my apartment, my chest tight, my hands trembling. Saying no felt like breaking some unspoken law of the universe. But beneath the fear, there was something else. Relief. They were finally tasting what life without me was like. And it terrified them. Emily, of course, reacted differently. She sent messages laced with sarcasm. Wow, you're really milking this drama, huh? Keep playing the victim, it suits you. And finally, you'll come crawling back. You always do. But her words didn't sting anymore. They fueled me. Because this time, I wasn't crawling. I was rising. That was when I began to think differently. To look at the years of betrayal not as chains that bound me, but as weapons I could finally turn back on them. Every debt I had paid, I had proof of. Every bill, every wire transfer, every receipt. My sacrifices weren't invisible to me, I had kept records, quietly, for years. Not out of spite then, but out of habit. But now? They became ammunition. If they wanted to paint me as the failure, I could strip away the mask and show the world the truth. The thought electrified me. For so long, I had been silent. But silence had only given them power. What if I spoke? What if I revealed everything? It wouldn't just hurt them. It would destroy them. And that was the turning point. Not the night I walked out. Not the night I raised my glass in defiance. No, the true turning point came when I realized I didn't just want distance. I wanted justice. I wanted them to feel the sting of betrayal. I wanted them to sit in silence, mocked, erased, invisible, just as they had made me feel. And the first step was simple. I would not return. Not to dinners. Not to holidays. Not to emergencies. Let them beg. Let them scramble. Let them choke on the silence they had once forced on me. Because this time, I wasn't the one trapped in the cage. They were. And I was the one holding the key. Revenge isn't rage. It isn't screaming, slamming doors, or throwing glasses across a room. Revenge is quiet. Methodical. It takes patience, restraint, and timing. I didn't want their pain for pain's sake. I didn't want chaos. I wanted balance. The scales had been tipped for too long, my sacrifices buried, their comfort prioritized, my worth mocked. What I sought wasn't cruelty. It was truth. And truth has a way of cutting deeper than any insult. The first step was simple. I reviewed everything. For years, I had kept a folder on my laptop. Not because I ever imagined needing it, but because numbers made me feel in control when emotions didn't. Every rent payment, every tuition transfer, every bill I'd covered, all there in black and white. Nearly $50,000 in silent contributions. Scrolling through those numbers now, I no longer felt guilt. I felt clarity. This was my life's ledger. Proof of everything they'd taken, every dollar that represented an evening I had skipped outings, or worked late, or swallowed loneliness so they could live comfortably. Emily liked to say money doesn't buy happiness. Maybe not. But it bought her freedom, and it bought my silence. Now, it was going to buy me leverage. The second step was harder. Emotional detachment. To plan effectively, I couldn't afford to waver. My family thrived on my hesitation, on my guilt, on my inability to stand firm. So I trained myself to respond differently. Every time my phone rang, every time a voicemail from mom arrived laced with sweetheart and family, I didn't hear her words. I heard a strategy. A manipulation designed to reel me back in. I replayed Emily's toast in my head until the sting dulled and the lesson hardened. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as funding. And funds had to be managed. The third step was external. I needed expertise. Quietly, without fanfare, I booked an appointment with a financial lawyer. Her office was tucked away in an unremarkable building downtown, nothing flashy. Her name was Marissa Adler, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper words. She didn't flinch when I explained. The toast, the decades of financial dependence, the quiet withdrawals from accounts, the house now at risk. When I finished, she leaned back, tapped her pen, and said, "You're not their daughter. You're their infrastructure. And you've finally realized you don't want to be scaffolding anymore." The word hit me like a stone dropped in water, structure. That's what I had been. Invisible, necessary, thankless. I asked her what I could do. And that's when the plan began to take shape. Step 1. Secure the family home. My parents' desperation, Emily's constant siphoning, it all led back to that single symbol. The house. They were on the edge of losing it, but instead of letting it collapse, I would intervene strategically. Not to save them, but to control the terms. Through a private trust, I could purchase the home, grant my parents lifetime residency, and lock it against future exploitation. Step 2. Document everything. If Emily tried to come after me, legally or emotionally, I'd have proof. The spreadsheet wasn't just numbers anymore, it was a shield. Dates, amounts, even messages where they had begged for help. All of it would paint the picture clearly. I was the giver, not the failure. Step 3. Cut off access. Any joint accounts, any automatic transfers, any just-in-case funds my parents or Emily had their hands on, all closed, all sealed. Not in anger, but in necessity. Step 4. Communication blackout. No explanations. No justifications. Just action. Because every time I explained myself, they found a way to twist it. This time, they would face results, not reasoning. Marissa's final piece of advice was blunt. They'll accuse you of being cruel. They'll try to guilt you, shame you, break you. But cruelty isn't what you're doing. Boundaries always feel cruel to people who benefited from your lack of them. That night, I went home and opened a fresh notebook. At the top of the first page, I wrote 3 words in bold ink. I am done. Below it, I listed the plan, step by step. Every detail, every move. And as I wrote, a strange calm settled over me. For so long, I had lived in reaction to Emily's chaos, to my parents' pleas, to the family's laughter. Now, for the first time, I was ahead of them. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork. It was signatures. It was silence. It was freedom. And when the plan was complete, I closed the notebook, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window watching the city lights blur against the night. The old Hannah would have cried. This Hannah smiled. Because the game was finally mine to play. When the plan moved from ink to action, it felt less like revenge and more like a tidy, necessary unmaking of every loose thread they'd used to wrap me up. I had spent so many years reacting, patching holes, plugging leaks. This was the first time I was the one in charge of where the water would run, and I intended to redirect it so there was no possibility of the house bleeding equity into Emily's pockets ever again. I started early on a Wednesday. The trust documents were ready. Marissa had drafted them with the kind of precision that leaves no wiggle room. The trust would buy the house at fair market value, grant my parents lifetime residence, prohibit transfers to third parties, and appoint an independent trustee, someone I did not have to answer to and who could not be influenced by the family's theatrics. There were conditions: no loans against the property, no unilateral withdrawals, and automatic freezes if anyone tried to evade the rules. Legally airtight. Morally clear. I put the transfer on an account that could not be traced back to gifts or favors. It was clean, formal, and undeniably mine. No whispered, "Don't tell anyone." No late-night wire with "it's just for now" in the memo line. I did this with an accountant's care, receipts, notations, the trail a forensic auditor could follow and nod at. I had learned over the years that the more meticulous the record, the less room for story twisting later. Then I closed the accounts. That part felt petty in the way it needed to. A joint checking account, which had become a Swiss Army knife of convenience for them, groceries here, spa there, I closed it. The automatic transfers to Emily's PayPal were cancelled. I revoked a nominal credit line that had been a shadow tunnel into my balance. I didn't send warnings. I didn't send pleas. I changed passwords, updated beneficiaries where needed, and filed notices where legally required. When a phone call or a text came from my mother asking why a bill bounced, I let it go to voicemail. If they wanted to know, they could come to me on my terms. If they wanted help, they could ask without entitlement. But closing accounts was only the physical side. The more delicate, quieter operation was the exposing. I knew they relied on my silence the way a house relies on a foundation, unseen, unspoken, utterly essential. So I removed their biggest weapon, ambiguity. I compiled the ledger in a single PDF, every payment, every date, every note I'd kept for myself. I paired dollars with context. A wire to E.D. Carson, with notes, 2018, down payment for condo, contingency agreement, none. A tuition payment, 2016, text thread where my father asks for help, it's just this once. Receipts for car repairs with the signature of the mechanic who had worked on Emily's vehicle the week she posted an Instagram story of a boutique weekend. It was exhaustive, because half measures feed denials. When I sent the ledger, I didn't attach a single accusatory sentence. No screaming, no public shaming on social media, no melodramatic reveal. The email subject line read, "In case you forgot, ledger attached." The body was one line, "Please see attached for your records." That was it. Clinical. Controlled. The silence after sending it was heavier than any argument I had ever had. They noticed. Of course they noticed. My father called first, voice clipped and quick. "Hannah, why, what is this?" he asked, like someone clutching a smoking match. "Documentation," I said. I thought transparency might help. You can't just, he started, then stopped. There was nothing he could say that would make the bank accounts balance, the mortgage secure, or the credit inquiries disappear. The ledger was facts. Facts do not negotiate. Within 24 hours, messages flooded my phone. Not the pleading kind at first. Instead, there were incredulous texts from cousins, cryptic forwards, and a few thinly veiled threats from people who had always been more comfortable flinging barbs than taking responsibility. Emily texted in all caps for a bit, moved on to sarcasm, then finally to the worst weapon of all, shame. "Who do you think you are?" she wrote. "You've destroyed us." She tried to paint herself as the victim before I had the chance to be so. My lawyer advised calm. Marissa said this was exactly the predictable reaction: fury, denial, then bargaining. She also warned me that their first instinct would be to attack my character, to make me the villain, because every time they had to face a truth, their reflex had been to find a scapegoat. "Stick to documentation," she kept saying. "You did the right thing." It was a small mantra I clung to when my nights grew cold and the old torment crawled back in. The trustee I chose was neither friend nor family. He was an older man with a reputation for impartiality and a horror of nepotism. He came to our meeting with a folder of his own and a face that said law was his religion. To him, the arrangement wasn't moral drama, it was precedent-setting. He signed the papers, slid them across the table, and looked at my parents and me equally. There were no handshakes filled with warmth. There were signatures, and the weight of legal finality. There were immediate effects. At first, they were logistical. The mortgage company sent a form acknowledging the new ownership, the property tax notices updated, advisors called. The house was safe from being used as collateral again. The financial scramble they had been doing in private, hidden refi talks, whispered conversations with mortgage brokers, had to stop. Suddenly, their options narrowed in the most inconvenient way. Responsibility began to stare them in the face. Emily freaked. The first week after the trust's activation, her social feed grew quieter. The clothes posted for likes dwindled, the weekend getaways paused. A cousin told me that she'd returned a pair of shoes to avoid using the credit card that no longer had my silent buffer. She told friends she was sorting things out, and her tone was the one of someone learning a new, harsher vocabulary of payment and consequence. Their attempts to draw me back were clumsy and desperate. My mother showed up at my door one Saturday with a casserole, eyes wet, voice trembling. "Sweetheart," she said, hands fluttering in that old, performative way she used when trying to pull me into old patterns. "We're so sorry if we hurt you." Her words smelled like the same apologies that had never materialized into change before. I let her speak. I listened to the lists of reasons, the litany of small-voiced promises. I watched her posture shift between pleading child and weary adult. It was a performance I had watched dozens of times. This time, I didn't step forward. "I've already taken steps to protect everyone," I told her. "I've set up protection so the house won't be used again. You have your residence guaranteed. But I won't be your ATM anymore. I won't be the invisible one who gets mocked for keeping your lives afloat." Her face crumpled in a way I felt for a millisecond, enough for an old reflex to want to swoop in and smooth it out. But I stayed. I kept the boundary. That boundary felt architectural, it held space, moved air, and refused to collapse. Emotionally, the execution was savage in its subtlety. My parents were not trying to be villains, they were scared. But the fear did not erase the years of neglect. It did not wash away the times my name was absent from the stories they celebrated publicly. The ledger had done what angry words could not, it had made them accountable in measurable currency. There were consequences I hadn't fully imagined. Neighbors started asking pointed questions, the kind that rippled the surface of polite conversation. "Is everything okay?" they would ask, wide-eyed. Gossip migrated from family WhatsApp groups into living rooms. People I had known since childhood began to glance at my parents with a different curiosity. The family's image, carefully curated for years, had cracks. When the mortgage broker called my father to ask about missed payments and reassigned the queries to the trustee, his voice had the smallness of a man realizing he'd been skating on his daughter's quiet generosity for years. The trustee, practical and unblinking, said, "We'll manage things from here. Please forward any further financial queries to our office." There was a finality in that sentence that made my father's shoulders fold inward as if the last piece of safety, the implied knowledge that someone else was always fixing things, had been pulled out from beneath him. That finality spilled over into the social realm, too. At the next family event, a small birthday held in the backyard of a cousin, the atmosphere was brittle. People were polite, straining for normalcy, but the jokes that once laced the air had a new edge. They were defensive, nervous laughter to cover guilt. Emily, who used to dominate parties with a confident volume, was quieter, her commentary cautious. She watched the adults, checking for any flinch that suggested someone might bring up the ledger. She tried to spin it, of course. At a phone call she left on speaker, I heard her practicing lines with a friend. "She's being dramatic," she said, voice oily with the practiced cadence of a public relations stunt. "She thinks money can buy her dignity." Her friend laughed, and I could imagine the scripts they wrote for each other. It was the same old story, paint the giver as greedy, and the recipients as blameless. But it didn't stick. The ledger was factual, it didn't need narratives. When they tried to weaponize the public, posting half-truths about family disputes and misunderstandings, I remained quiet. I did not air grievances on social media. I had no interest in dramatics. My leverage was not in spectacle but in structural change. If I wanted the world to see their version of events, I would let the documents speak. If they wanted to frame me as mercenary, I would show the math. Every action I took was purposeful. When Emily called asking for just a little help, I forwarded a copy of the ledger to her and left a note, see attached. "You've been informed." She blew up my phone with accusations, threats, desperate pleas. When she realized there was no one to call who would bend the rules anymore, she got meaner. She tried to gaslight relatives, accusing me of fabricating numbers. Then, predictably, she tried to seduce sympathy with performative breakdowns in front of the cousins that mattered. People's reactions were mixed, but the ledger had already shifted the baseline of conversations. There were legal threats, too, vague insinuations from a cousin who liked to posture about litigation. He said things about family and honor, about taking this further. His words made good cocktail chatter, but when he asked for the receipts to back his claims, there was nothing he could point to. That's the beauty and terror of records, they strip sentiment down to facts. You can shout your morality, but if it doesn't match the numbers, the credibility crumbles. And there was something else I gained through the execution of the plan, clarity. Without being the family's secret payroll, my life expanded in ways I hadn't allowed before. I paid off a credit card that had lingered, booked a weekend trip I had postponed for years, and allowed myself to plan without the immediate shadow of someone else's emergency. The small luxuries mattered less than the quiet truth that when you stop giving the house away, you start building your own. The final humiliation of their dynamic came not from courts or news feeds, but from my own sense of peace. When the trustee called to confirm the house transfer was complete, he said, "You did what's necessary. They'll adapt or they'll resent you. Either way, you are secure." His voice was dry, his words were final. I remember looking at the deed, the notary's ink still fresh, and feeling a relief so simple it felt like breath. For once, they could not laugh at me and be protected by my silence. They tried, in fits and starts, to claw back into the structure, but the legal scaffolding held. The trustee denied a few suspicious requests, a mortgage refinance talk was shut down, a proposed private loan was vetoed. The house, once a mechanism for exploitation, became a regulated asset with boundaries I had set. The power balance shifted incrementally and irrevocably. When I sat alone months later, watching snow melt across my window, I thought of that dinner and the laughter that had once been my world. I thought about the ledger, the trustee, the quiet signatures that had rewritten my family's options. The execution had not been dramatic, it had been surgical. And in the wake of it, what remained was the simplest, most radical thing, a life I could plan on my terms. The execution did not erase the pain of the past. It did not mend the old insults or conjure apologies from thin air. But it made the future mine. It removed me from the trap they had set and, in doing so, forced them to step into the consequences of a life without my silent labor. When Emily realized her feed had less spark, that invites dried up, that the people who tuned into her life no longer saw the same glossy story, she raged in private and performed in public. My parents, older, fragile, stumbled through the new reality with a kind of shame that tasted different than anger. And me? I kept building, ledger in one drawer, passport in another, plans unfolding in the quiet corners of my days. Execution had been the hardest part, emotionally and logistically. And yet, in the slow burn aftermath, in the small rearrangements of routine and social expectation, I found something I had been missing for years: space. Space to heal, to plan, to live without being required to justify my generosity by accepting humiliation. The house stood unchanged in the neighborhood, the same windows, the same overgrown lilacs, the same porch light. But what had shifted inside its paperwork was everything. I had bought not just protection for my parents, but protection for myself, against their entitlement, their jokes, their quiet cruelties. I had built a boundary that was enforceable, immovable, and fair. And as the seasons turned, the ledger collected new entries, not debts to others, but investments into myself. The execution was complete. The aftermath would take time. But for the first time in my life, I felt the future was not a series of obligations I'd been born into, but a space I could shape. The house still stands. Same paint, same chipped steps, same porch light that flickers when the wind hits from the east. From the street, nothing looks different. Neighbors walk past, waving at my parents, pretending nothing has shifted. But I know. Beneath the walls, beneath the mortgage papers, beneath the laughter that used to ring in those rooms, everything is different now. Because for the first time in my life, the silence is mine. Not the silence they used to force on me, not the silence of shame, not the silence of swallowing insults just to keep the peace. This silence is deliberate. It is chosen. And it is powerful. After the execution of my plan, the dust didn't settle right away. It never does. Families like mine don't simply implode, they bleed slowly, trying to disguise the wound with tablecloths and small talk. But the ledger, the trust, the dismantling of their convenience, it all landed like shrapnel. They could no longer pretend. They could no longer hide the truth that for years, their comfort had been built on my back. At first, they avoided me. Calls stopped. Invitations dried up. Group chats continued without my number in them. There were whispers, of course, I know because cousins carried them to me, curious to see if I'd flinch. She thinks she's better than us now. She ruined her own parents. What kind of daughter does that? The kind of daughter who got tired of being erased. That's who. But time has a strange way of reordering stories. After the outrage burned through, after the cousins found new scandals to gossip about, after Emily's drama lost its shine, the narrative began to shift. People started asking quieter questions. Instead of how could she, they asked, why did she? And when they looked at the receipts, when they remembered the countless times I had paid without protest, when they realized how long I'd been the invisible lifeline, the judgment softened. Not for everyone, of course. Some still cling to the idea that I betrayed the family. That's fine. I don't need their approval. The only approval I ever wanted was my parents', and when I finally accepted I would never get it, that's when I became free. The house is safe now. Ironically, in protecting myself, I protected them too. They can live there without fear of losing it, because I cut off their own self-destructive path. They'll never say thank you. They'll never acknowledge that I was the one who built the safety net. But they know. Deep down, they know. And that is enough. Emily? She's quieter these days. Not reformed, not transformed, just quieter. Social feeds don't shine as bright. The luxury posts come less often. I hear she's working on herself, though I don't put much stock in her words. For the first time in her life, she has to face what life looks like without me standing in the shadows, patching her holes. That alone is victory enough. And me? I rebuilt. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way. There was no grand speech, no slow clap of recognition from the family. My rebuilding happened in small, steady moments. Paying off my own debts. Planning a future where my money worked for me, not for people who mocked me. Taking a vacation without guilt. Sitting in a cafe on a random Tuesday afternoon and realizing I could order dessert simply because I wanted it, not because I had to keep a budget flexible for someone else's crisis. Freedom, it turns out, doesn't roar. It whispers. It's the absence of a call at 2 a.m. asking for a quick favor. It's the silence of a phone that doesn't buzz with someone else's emergencies. It's walking into my own apartment and knowing every bill, every piece of furniture, every inch of space is mine, untouched by their entitlement. Do I miss them? That's a harder question. I miss the idea of them. I miss the version of family I used to dream of when I was younger, the parents who would be proud, the sister who would be kind. But I don't miss the reality. I don't miss the laughter at my expense, the erasure of my contributions, the endless cycle of giving and being mocked for it. What I miss never really existed. It was only ever a wish. People sometimes ask if I regret it. If I regret pulling away, exposing the truth, dismantling the system. I tell them this: I regret waiting so long. I regret every year I let them convince me I was worth less. I regret every joke I laughed off when it cut deep. I regret letting my silence be the cement of their comfort. But the act itself? No. I don't regret that. Because now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone whole. Someone who didn't let the fear of being called selfish keep her shackled. Someone who finally understood that love without respect isn't love, it's manipulation. The aftermath wasn't a storm. It was a clearing. And in that clearing, I found something I thought I'd never have, myself. I tell this story not because I want pity, not because I want revenge, but because I know someone out there is still living in the shadows of their own family. Someone who keeps paying, keeps giving, keeps bleeding themselves dry in exchange for scraps of belonging. To that person, I'll say this. You can break free. It won't be easy. It won't be pretty. And you'll be called names: selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. But in the end, none of that matters. What matters is that you stop living invisible in a story you're writing with your own sacrifices. The house still stands. My family still lives inside it. They still laugh, though maybe a little quieter now. They still tell stories, though I know they skip over mine. That's fine. Let them. Because I am no longer the ghost in the corner, no longer the forgotten one propping up their illusions. I am the